Let's talk about network ports for a moment. You should already be familiar with MAC addresses and IP addresses, two different ways of addressing physical computers on a network. For example, here I have a IP address. Now, much like the address of a building, an IP address gets you to a particular computer. However, on that computer, there may be a variety of running software services that need to be addressed directly. And that's where ports come in. Ports are essentially logical addresses on the end of an IP address that reference a specific part of a computer. You can think of these like apartment numbers on an apartment building. While the apartment building itself has a street address or an IP address, each of the apartments within that building has its own apartment number. So it's a logical division of the IP address itself. All of these ports are either TCP or UDP ports, and there are 65,536 TCP ports and the same number of UDP ports. I've listed here several of the ports that are very common. The well-known ports, ports 0 to 1023, are the ports that have been assigned for a long time on the internet and essentially won't change. These are services that everybody uses frequently and are strongly defined. So for example, FTP, the file transfer protocol, is on port 21. Some of the related protocols or related ports to FTP would be the secure version, SFTP, down here on port 115, or TFTP on port 69, a file transfer protocol that uses UDP rather than TCP. Secure Shell is on port 22. Telnet, used for gaining command line access to devices, is port 23. SMTP, or the Simple Mail Transport Protocol, is on port 25. Some other email services include POP3 on port 110 and IMAP on port 143. Now these three email services, SMTP, POP3, and IMAP, now have secure counterparts that usually use SSL or one of the higher port numbers as an encrypted version of those particular protocols. DNS, the Domain Name Service, which translates URLs into IP addresses, is on port 53. DHCP is on UDP port 67. HTTP, or Hypertext Transfer Protocol, our common web port, is on port 80. However, in today's world, the vast majority of web traffic is actually on port 443, or HTTPS Secure. The Network Time Protocol, NTP, is on port 123, and the Secure Network Time Protocol is on port 580. LDAP is on port 389, and encrypted LDAP on port 636. Now, of all of these, the ones that you really need to know are FTP on port 21, DNS on port 53, HTTP on port 80, SFTP on port 115, and SSL or HTTPS on port 443. The registered ports are the next group of ports. They cover the ports from 1024 to 49151. These include software services that aren't necessarily universal, such as the well-known ports over here. For example, RDP, or the Windows Remote Desktop Protocol, is on 3389. Halo 1 has a port on 2302, and PowerShell has a port on 5986. So how do we address each of these different port numbers? Well, we usually indicate a port number by putting a colon and the port number after a valid IP address. Now realize that all of these ports won't be open on all computers. In fact, most of them will be closed by default unless they are opened by a specific application. A closed port means that you can't connect to it. A listening port means that there is a software service, one of these, behind that port waiting for a connection. Established means that a connection has been made, usually using the TCP three-way handshake, in order to connect another computer to the software service on this device. For example, let's talk about web servers for a moment. So a web server listening on port 80 offering the HTTP or Hypertext Transfer Protocol will be waiting for somebody to request a web page. My computer, when it wants that web page, will send an HTTP request to the web server at that particular port. The web server will then receive that request, process the request, and return a particular web page back to my computer.